This is the podcast overview for week 6. We will be covering chapter 6, memory. And I have your to-do list here open. But what I would like to do with this podcast just to start out is really just zone in on the importance of reading the textbook. I've met with a couple students over the past week, just helping them get through some of the material and understand some concepts. This has really been helpful, I think, for them, as well as for me to sort of gauge where everybody is at. If you need to do a Zoom meeting with me, please let me know. If you have concepts that you're struggling understanding or just need some extra examples or help, I'm available to do that. But what I am noticing just from having a couple of those meetings is that I think a lot of you aren't spending enough time reading the chapters, okay? Or maybe you go through the chapter once and then you think, okay, I'm good. This is a very reading heavy course, and I've selected the textbook with great thought and care because I like the textbook. I like how everything is laid out. And I love that it has a lot of resources for you all to use. So using the Revel resources along with the book are super helpful. Doing the practice quizzes before you take your actual quiz on Play-Doh is helpful, or doing them before you go and take your test is helpful. But even more than that is just reading through the chapters more than once. You might even read through it and then listen to it on audio. It has that option that you can do that, because what starts to happen is the more you're hearing the material, it starts to take new form, right? And this week we're learning about memory, so it's interesting. You'll be kind of seeing the behind the scenes of how that all works with our short-term memory and our long-term memory. But I think that a great place to start would be using these objectives that I post here. Now you can click on this link and you can listen to the very brief podcast I have that I go over each of these in detail, kind of talk about the importance of each concept. But this is meant to help you be a guide as to what you should be understanding. A lot of these objectives are not answered in one sentence, right? When I say describe Atkinson-Shiffrin's classic 3-stage processing model of memory, stop. That right there is a lot, right? They have a model of memory that involves 3 stages that they say we process when we're taking in a new memory, forming a new memory. And then they go on further to explain how working memory processing occurs in short-term memory. And so to answer this question, it really involves probably a paragraph or more, just information on what elements are important to answering this question. So this is how you should be going through these objectives so that you're making sure you're understanding all the important details within these objectives, which makes up the chapter of the book. So here for chapter 6, memory, I would encourage you all to read through the book once through, kind of get a good sense of what's in there. And you might have questions after that reading, and then come back to it in a day or two and read through it again, maybe this time in more detail, looking for answers to those questions, looking to answer these objectives as you're reading. It flows through in the same format that the chapter flows. So it should be relatively easy to find the answers to these questions and be able to come up with that. And then you have for yourself a little working document that will help you to study for the test. I'm really trying to give you all some great tips on how to take in the material and the information. You have also the lecture slides, which I think are helpful, but more so helpful is the book and reading the chapter, even twice, 3 times through, highlighting keywords and definitions, putting them on note cards. That will be helpful for studying for the test. These videos aren't meant to be all-inclusive, explaining everything. They're just meant to really pop out key concepts on memory and make it fun, make it interesting. You can play these videos over and over as many times as you like because they are helpful when we see things in video format and we hear them auditorily and we read them visually. All of those are sources of input as we take in information, and we tend to remember things better when we've taken it in multiple different formats. So please try that if you haven't yet done so on previous chapters. Once you've watched these videos, go back and see if you can find what they were talking about in the chapter. You know, when the guy gets on and he gives his spiel about how we make memories, is that true? Is that right? Does it jive with what you read in the book? What key pieces of information are important to how we make memories? Same thing for remembering and forgetting. So this is the process of making a memory. How does the brain form a memory? How does it imprint on your brain? And here is a process of getting back out that information, getting back out that memory, remembering it. And then what happens when we forget? What's the brain doing that we forget things, and why? So I would sort of challenge you to watch these videos and then go back through the chapter and try to find your own answers and see if it jives with what the video is saying. That would be a much more detailed way of taking in the material. Then you would be ready for your discussion, and this week it has to do with Hawk Reading 4.4. And you're really diving into the research of Elizabeth, blanking on her name, Loftus, sorry. Total memory fart, right? Elizabeth Loftus was and is still a really huge memory researcher, and she does a lot with law enforcement, actually. A lot of her research has been used in understanding how to best question a witness, how to gather testimonies from eyewitnesses. So it's been super useful and applicable. So the reading's really interesting, and she has a lot to say with how we reconstruct a memory. So when we watch something happen, when we see it, how does our brain process that information? And then how do we spit that back out when we're questioned about it later? Is it reliable? Is it unreliable? What does the research say about that? And how are law enforcement officials using her work when it comes to eyewitness accounts and gathering testimonies? That's how our law enforcement officials work, is they gather testimonies and they kind of put the pieces together to try to determine what happened, in a crime or something of that nature. And so, what can we take away from her work that would help law enforcement do a better job with that? Okay, so that's kind of part one of the discussion. And then the next part is some other work she does on repressed memories. So she's done a lot of work on, are repressed memories real? Can we really repress a memory? And the types of memories that we tend to hear about being repressed tend to be these traumatic incidences. And she kind of argues that when something's traumatic, we remember it pretty vividly. In fact, we have something called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. We remember it so vividly. It kind of plagues us and causes us anxiety. So she finds it hard with what she knows about memory and how the brain operates to believe that somebody can repress something like that. And she's got some data to back that up, and she's got some instances where, she thinks that maybe it's possible, but a lot of evidence as to why maybe it's not. And some of the things that happen in a clinical setting as a client is recalling, and I say that in quotes, a repressed memory. Kind of the atmosphere and the environment they're in when that's happening can sometimes be very suggestive. So, she kind of says, word to the wise, let's be careful here with how we interpret that. So that's the basis of your discussion, is you're talking about some of that research and delving into what she has to say about it. All right, and then you just have a quiz this week on the chapter 6, and then you'll be done with the week. So as you're working through that material, please feel free to email me. Let me know if you'd like to chat or have any questions. Email is another really great option too. You can ask questions and I can answer them, but I'm more than willing to also Zoom meet with you. So just keep that in mind as you're working through this week. I hope that you approach the week with maybe some new tools and new ways that will help you to improve your learning.